The old man sat alone at the parade until a stranger took his hand. He unfolded the same chair he'd used for 23 years and placed it at the curb like it still mattered. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe if you love meaningful stories, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I really enjoy seeing where these stories travel. Main Street was still quiet. The parade wouldn't start for over an hour, but he liked to arrive early. He always had. Back when his wife was alive, they would come together, coffee cups in hand, sitting close as the sun rose behind the rooftops. She liked the marching bands. He liked the way she clapped for the veterans. They used to bring their granddaughter. She would sit cross-legged on a blanket in front of them, waving a tiny flag, always asking when the fire trucks were coming. That was a long time ago. Now it was just him. Just the folding chair. The same spot across from the bakery, near the lamppost with the chipped paint. He didn't even know if anyone else noticed that he returned year after year. Maybe they assumed he was waiting for someone. Maybe they didn't notice at all. He settled into the chair, setting his cane across his lap. His hands rested on top of it, fingers laced loosely. His eyes followed the movements of the volunteers setting up barricades and taping signs to storefronts. He gave a small nod when one of them looked his way, but the volunteer didn't stop, just kept moving. It didn't bother him. He wasn't expecting company. Across the street, folding chairs appeared in clusters. Young parents holding iced coffees unfolded strollers and handed out juice boxes. Kids bounced around with red, white, and blue streamers, laughter rising as the sidewalk filled in. Groups greeted each other with hugs. People offered extra seats. Strangers made room on blankets. Everyone seemed to belong somewhere. The old man stayed where he was. No one sat near him. The spot to his left stayed empty. So did the one on his right. He watched quietly as a little girl skipped by with her father. She wore a sparkly shirt and had tiny flags in her braids. Her father hoisted her onto his shoulders as the band began to warm up down the street. Her laughter was loud and easy, the kind of sound that used to come from his own granddaughter. He smiled without meaning to, then looked away. It had taken him a few years after his wife passed to come back to the parade. The first year, he couldn't do it. The second year, he drove into town but kept going. Just drove. Now, he came. Every year. Same chair, same spot. He didn't know what kept him coming. It wasn't habit. It wasn't hope. It was just something he still did. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small photograph. It was faded and worn at the edges. It showed his wife sitting in the same chair, her hand on his knee, both of them smiling like there was no end to any of it. He looked at it for a moment, then slid it back into his pocket. The crowd grew louder. More people arrived. Vendors pushed carts up and down the sidewalks. Someone handed out miniature flags. He accepted one with a nod but didn't wave it. Just rested it against his chair leg and kept watching the street. A young couple walked by and glanced at the empty seat beside him. They looked like they might ask to sit, but then moved on. He didn't mind. He understood. He didn't expect anyone to sit there. That wasn't why he left the space open. It was just a way of remembering. As the first sounds of the parade began to echo from the far end of Main Street, the old man straightened a little in his chair. The high school band was coming into view. The crowd leaned forward. Flags lifted into the air. Music filled the space. And the old man sat still, eyes forward, hands resting gently on his cane. Waiting. Watching. Alone. The band marched past in perfect time, drums echoing down the street, but the old man barely moved. He watched them go by with the same quiet stillness he had carried all morning. His eyes followed the rhythm of the drums, the brass section catching the sunlight, the flags twirling in practiced unison. But his hands didn't clap. His expression didn't change. It wasn't boredom. It wasn't sadness. It was something in between. A quiet kind of presence that didn't ask for attention. Around him, people cheered. Kids stood on tiptoes. Parents pointed out familiar faces in the lineup. Someone shouted a name, and a girl in uniform waved from the middle of the band, smiling wide. There was laughter, camera flashes, a baby crying somewhere in the crowd. The old man didn't flinch at the noise. He'd been here too many times to be startled. Every part of the parade felt familiar. The way the crowd pressed forward when the fire engines rolled by, the kids covering their ears when the sirens let out a quick blast, the small-town floats with hand-painted signs and kids throwing candy into the street. Some things never changed, but the space next to him stayed empty. He noticed a few people glance his way, just briefly. A quick look, then back to their conversations. No one spoke to him. No one asked why he was sitting alone. There wasn't any malice in it. Just the way people move past things they don't understand. He reached down to adjust his flag. It had slipped and was now resting against the leg of the chair. He didn't pick it up, just nudged it back into place with the toe of his shoe. A group of teenagers passed behind him, laughing loudly and bumping into one another. One of them nearly tripped over the back leg of his chair but caught himself just in time. The old man didn't react. The boy looked down for a split second, then kept walking. He shifted in his seat, slowly, adjusting his back. His shoulders were beginning to ache, but he didn't complain. He never did. He had learned a long time ago that pain was just part of the day. It came and went. You dealt with it quietly. A woman walked by with a stroller and a toddler dragging a balloon behind her. The toddler waved at him without thinking, the kind of innocent wave that kids give to everyone. The old man gave a small nod in return. The mother didn't see it. She was already focused on finding space closer to the curb. For a brief moment, he thought about not coming next year. The thought had crept in once or twice over the last few months. His legs didn't move like they used to. The stairs at home felt longer. Even folding and unfolding the chair took longer than it used to. Maybe this would be the last one. But then the veterans started coming down the street. Marching slowly, some of them carrying flags, some walking with canes, a few in wheelchairs. The crowd always stood for this part. He stayed seated, but not out of disrespect. He brought his hand to his chest. He kept his eyes on every single face. Some of the veterans saluted, some waved, some just walked, heads high, focused straight ahead. He watched them the way someone watches something that matters. Not with a smile, not with tears, just with presence. When they passed, he looked down at the flag again. The noise returned after that. More music, more cheering, more movement. But the moment had shifted something. Just a little. He sat back in the chair, folding his hands across his cane, and looked out over the street. He wasn't expecting anything different. He never did. But still, he stayed. Because this was the place he always came back to. Even when no one knew why. Even when no one sat beside him. The spot next to him stayed empty, even as the crowd pushed closer together. By now, the parade was in full swing. The floats rolled by one after another, each decorated with bright colors, handmade banners, and waving kids tossing candy. People stepped off the curbs to get better photos. Blankets were scooted forward. Strollers were nudged into tighter spaces. It was the kind of crowd that usually made strangers share elbow room without a second thought. But no one sat next to him. There were open patches elsewhere, but his spot was the only one with a single chair, and no one else around it. The empty space to his right stretched just far enough that it was noticeable. A place where someone should have been, where someone used to be. He didn't try to fill it. The chair had always been his. Hers used to sit to the right. Same kind, same size. They bought them as a pair from a hardware store almost 25 years ago. They'd carried them to every parade after that. She always brought a small cushion for hers, said it helped with her back. He used to tease her about it, and she'd just roll her eyes. Now it was just one chair, one person, and the space beside him had remained open ever since. Someone leaned over from a nearby group and offered him a bottle of water. He nodded in thanks, took it, and placed it at his feet. He didn't open it right away. He didn't want to seem ungrateful, but he wasn't thirsty. Not yet. More floats passed. A local dance group performed in front of the judge's table across the street. Kids cheered and clapped. Music blared from a speaker mounted on a pickup truck, and a man on a microphone shouted out sponsor names. The noise made conversation difficult for most people, but he wasn't trying to talk. He watched quietly, the way he always did. A small boy wandered over at one point, picking up a piece of candy that had landed near his chair. The boy looked up at him for a second, gave a shy wave, then ran back to his family. The old man gave a slight nod. That was enough. His attention drifted as a float rolled by with a banner that read, 40 Years of Community. He remembered riding one like that once. Not as part of an organization, but with his wife and granddaughter during one of the anniversary parades. They had decorated it with paper flowers the night before. His wife had insisted on red and white ones to match the town colors. She had a way of making simple things feel like tradition. He felt the ache in his chest more than usual today. It wasn't the kind that made you cry or lose your breath. It was the quiet ache of memory, the kind that didn't need to be spoken aloud to be real. He shifted his cane slightly. The sun was warming the sidewalk now. His shoulders were tense. He thought about how long he'd been sitting. He thought about leaving early. But he didn't. He hadn't come for the floats. He had come to keep something steady, to hold the space, even if no one else remembered why it mattered. As another marching band made its way down the street, the old man leaned back slightly and let the sound pass through him. He didn't clap. He didn't cheer. But he didn't look away. There was something about sitting in the same place year after year, even when everything else had changed. There was something about holding that space when no one else did. He didn't expect the empty seat to be filled, but he left it open anyway. He tried not to look at the families sitting together, but some things were hard to ignore. A few rows down, an older man was surrounded by grandchildren. 2 boys sat cross-legged at his feet, sorting through candy. A little girl leaned against his arm, her hair in braids, her voice rising every few minutes as she asked when the horses were coming. The man smiled at her, said something soft, and she giggled. One of the boys looked up and said, "Grandpa, did you see that one?" and pointed toward a float that had just passed. The old man across the street didn't hear the words exactly, but he didn't need to. He knew the feeling. He'd lived it. He looked away. He focused his eyes on the float ahead, one that wasn't particularly interesting, just a group of teenagers sitting on hay bales waving at the crowd. He stared a little too long, just enough to keep his attention from drifting back to what he didn't want to see. It was always like this during the parade. The excitement, the music, the laughter, they were real, and he didn't resent them. But they carried reminders too. Not in a cruel way, not in a loud way, just in that quiet, consistent way that memories do when they sit beside you in silence. He shifted again, the cane between his knees, hands resting on the top. The air had grown warmer, the crowd louder. Someone nearby was handing out mini flags. A young girl passed one toward him, smiling politely. He nodded and took it. She didn't linger, just turned and skipped back to her group. He held the flag for a while, not waving it, just holding it. The stick was light in his fingers. He thought about how his wife used to bring snacks to share, little crackers in a plastic bag, a thermos with lemonade. Their granddaughter always got to pour the drinks, even when she was too small to hold the lid straight. He could still picture her face, how serious she looked, concentrating, her tongue poking out slightly as she poured too fast and spilled just a little. He remembered laughing, not loudly, just between the three of them. It was one of those small, safe moments that no one else would remember, but he did. Now the spot beside him was still empty. The parade kept moving. He sat quietly, not sad exactly, just distant, present but far away. Someone a few rows down called out, "There they are!" and pointed toward a group of riders on horseback. The crowd shifted again, phones came out, and kids squealed with excitement. The old man looked up, and for a moment the noise fell away. Not because it got quieter, but because his mind went somewhere else. His wife had loved the horses, always said they were the best part. She'd clap gently, nodding as they passed, and she'd always say the same thing. They hold themselves like they know they're important. She used to take his hand during this part of the parade. Every time. Just a light squeeze, nothing more. He glanced at the empty space beside him again. The breeze picked up slightly, and a few wrappers tumbled across the sidewalk. He didn't reach for them. He didn't move. A teenager walked by with a tray of bottled water and granola bars. He asked if the old man needed anything. The man smiled faintly and shook his head. The boy gave a quick nod and moved on. He adjusted his flag again, then folded it across his lap. He wasn't expecting anything. He didn't need anything. But the space beside him, it was there. Not because he forgot, but because he remembered. She had almost walked past him. The street was crowded now, people standing behind rows of chairs, leaning over strollers, stepping off curbs for a better view. The parade had been going for a while. Music echoed down the block, and the next float was coming into view, covered in red streamers and high school students waving from a flatbed trailer. She wasn't looking for anything, just weaving her way through the crowd, holding a bottle of water, trying to find her friends. She didn't expect to notice him, but something about the way he was sitting made her pause. She had seen older people at the parade before, grandparents, neighbors, church folks, but most of them had company, someone beside them, someone talking to them, laughing, pointing at the floats. He was different. He wasn't watching like the others. He wasn't clapping or taking pictures or laughing at the kids tossing candy. He was just sitting, still, like he'd been there for a long time. Not out of place exactly, just alone. She stopped for a second and looked at him. The chair was plain, worn. His hands rested on top of a wooden cane. There was a small flag tucked near his feet. He wasn't looking around. His eyes were on the street, but he didn't seem to be focused on the parade anymore. She almost kept walking, but she didn't. Instead, she turned back. She stepped around a family standing near the curb, walked past a couple adjusting a camera, and made her way toward him. She hesitated just a moment before speaking. "Mind if I sit?" He looked up, surprised at first. His eyes studied her face for a second, just long enough to see that she meant it. Then he nodded toward the ground next to him. "I don't have a chair," she said. "That's all right," he said, voice low. "The spot's open." She sat down cross-legged on the pavement beside him. The sidewalk was warm beneath her. People around them were still moving, talking, pointing. But in that moment, it felt quieter somehow. They didn't speak right away. She glanced at the floats as they passed, then at him. His hands stayed steady on the cane. He looked straight ahead. Not unfriendly, just quiet. After a few minutes, she spoke again. "You've been here a while?" "Since before it started." "You come every year?" He nodded once. "Used to come with my wife." There was a pause. "She passed," he said after a moment. Not a question. Not a story. Just a sentence. "I'm sorry," she said, meaning it. He didn't respond, but he didn't turn away either. They sat like that for a while, watching. The floats rolled by. The music kept playing. The crowd didn't notice them. She didn't mind. After a while, he spoke again. She liked the horses best, said they were the proudest part of the parade. She smiled a little. "They're coming up soon, I think." He gave a small nod, but didn't say more. She didn't ask his name. He didn't ask hers. It didn't feel like that kind of moment. It felt like something else, like holding space for something unspoken. When the horses did come, he sat up a little straighter, just enough to notice, just enough to remember. She didn't speak. She just stayed beside him, her hands resting on her knees, eyes following the riders as they passed. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. He just sat there, and she sat with him. And that was enough. The parade kept moving, but neither of them got up. A new float passed, carrying a group of kids from the local elementary school. They were dressed as storybook characters, waving paper wands and holding up handmade signs. The crowd loved it. People clapped and pointed. A few parents called out names from the sidewalk, and the kids shouted back, excited to be seen. The old man watched quietly. The young woman beside him did too. They still hadn't exchanged names. She hadn't asked about his life, and he hadn't asked about hers. But the silence between them didn't feel heavy. It felt settled, like both of them understood that words weren't the important part. She glanced over now and then. His hands hadn't moved from the cane. His eyes stayed on the parade, but she could tell his focus drifted, like he was watching something behind what was in front of him, the kind of watching that came from memory, not just from sight. The sun was higher now. A few clouds passed slowly across the sky, giving the crowd a break from the heat. Someone nearby was handing out popsicles to kids. A little boy ran past with a red one melting down his fingers. He laughed as he tried to catch the drips with his mouth. She smiled at the boy, then looked at the old man. He didn't smile, but there was something softer in his expression now. Not joy, exactly, but less weight. "I used to sit here with my wife," he said, his voice low. She turned to him slightly, listening. "Every year. Same spot. Right there." He nodded to the space beside him. "She always packed snacks. Always insisted we come early so we could get the right view." She didn't interrupt. She let him talk, even if it was only a few words at a time. "We used to bring our granddaughter," he continued. "She'd sit on a blanket right in front of us. She's grown now. Lives out of state." He paused. "My wife passed 5 years ago. I kept coming. Didn't feel right not to." She nodded. "It makes sense." She always said the best part of a small town is that it remembers you, even when you're not here to see it. His voice wasn't shaky, but it carried something heavier than volume, the kind of weight that only comes with time. They both looked toward the next group in the parade, a marching band, loud, confident, all the brass and drums echoing off the storefronts. The energy was high, but they stayed seated, steady. She didn't try to comfort him. She didn't reach out or say she understood. She just stayed. Sometimes, that's what people need the most. A boy tossed a piece of candy that landed near her knee. She picked it up and held it out. "Hard candy," she said. "Root beer flavor." He looked at it, then at her hand. "My wife used to keep those in her purse," he said. "She'd pass them to the kids when they got fidgety." She smiled. "You want it?" He hesitated for a second, then took it from her hand. He didn't eat it, just held it in his palm for a while before sliding it into his shirt pocket. "I'll keep it," he said. They didn't speak after that. The parade went on. More music, more cheers. The horses were coming soon. And as they waited, side by side, something about the moment settled in. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet and human. Two people, strangers, sitting in a crowd that didn't notice them, but somehow, in the middle of all the noise, finding something that felt a little like connection. The parade kept going, but time started to slow down. It wasn't that the floats were any less exciting or the music any softer. It was just that the old man and the young woman had settled into a kind of quiet rhythm. Neither one needed to speak. Neither one felt the need to leave. They just stayed where they were, shoulder to shoulder but not touching, facing the street like they had been doing this every year. Another float passed. This one carried the local baseball team, boys in matching hats waving to the crowd. A coach at the back tossed mini foam balls into the audience. One bounced near the old man's feet, and a kid darted past to grab it, laughing. The old man shifted slightly to make room but said nothing. The young woman just smiled and let the moment pass. More music followed. A jazz group on a trailer. A pickup truck with two dogs sitting in the bed, wearing bandanas. People clapped and laughed and called out names. The energy rolled through the street like a wave, but the spot where they sat stayed calm. Still. The man hadn't moved much since she joined him. Just small shifts. The kind people make when they're older and everything has to be done slowly. His back was straighter now than when she first saw him. His hands weren't gripping the cane so tightly. He seemed lighter somehow. Not young, not different. Just less alone. She didn't say anything about it. She didn't want to interrupt whatever was happening, whatever had changed. It wasn't something that needed to be explained. A brass band came next. The sound echoed off the storefronts, bouncing between buildings and carrying through the crowd. She glanced over at the old man again and noticed he was watching more closely now. His chin lifted slightly, his shoulders squared. He didn't smile, but his eyes were clearer, focused. She wondered what it was like, year after year, to sit in the same spot without the person you used to share it with. She couldn't imagine it. Not really. But sitting beside him now, she started to understand a piece of it. He was holding space, not just on the sidewalk, but inside himself. And that kind of space doesn't get smaller over time. If anything, it gets wider. He reached into his shirt pocket and took out the root beer candy she had given him earlier. He unwrapped it carefully, slowly, and popped it into his mouth. He gave a small nod in her direction. Not dramatic. Just enough to say he appreciated it. She nodded back. Across the street, the judge's table clapped as a group of veterans marched past. They weren't in step, but it didn't matter. The crowd stood again. Hats came off, hands over hearts. The young woman stood too. So did the old man. It took him a moment. He leaned on his cane, pushed up from the chair, and rose to his feet. They stood together until the last veteran passed. When they sat back down, neither one said a word. They didn't need to. The final floats were making their way into view now. The local high school, the cheerleaders, the last fire truck with its lights flashing. The end of the parade always came quicker than people expected. But not for him. He had waited all morning, watched it all. And now, As the last of the music played and the crowd started to shift again, people gathering their things, kids collecting candy, parents folding blankets, the old man didn't rush. He just sat there, still and steady, beside someone who hadn't let the moment pass him by. And for the first time in a long time, the end of the parade didn't feel like the end of something. It felt like enough. The music faded, and the last float turned the corner, but neither of them moved right away. People around them were already standing. Some were folding chairs. Others were calling to their kids, gathering water bottles and candy wrappers. The noise changed. It wasn't parade noise anymore. It was packing up, heading home, checking phones and traffic reports. But the old man stayed seated, hands resting on the cane again, his back straight. The young woman stayed beside him, legs crossed on the warm sidewalk, eyes still on the street. They had watched the entire parade together, strangers at the start, but now it didn't feel like that word fit anymore. Not quite. She looked over at him. He was still watching the street, even though it was empty now, like there was something else out there he didn't want to miss. She didn't say anything. She just watched with him. After a few minutes, he reached down and began to gather his things. Slow, careful movements. He slid the small flag into the side pocket of the chair, folded the program he'd picked up earlier, gripped the cane with both hands before he pushed himself up to stand. The chair creaked a little as he folded it shut. The sidewalk beneath him was still warm from the sun, but the air had shifted slightly. A breeze picked up, tugging at the loose streamers left on the curb. She stood too, brushed the dust from the back of her jeans, looked at him, and waited. He looked back at her and gave a small nod. It could have been goodbye. It could have been thank you. She wasn't sure. Maybe it was both. Then, just as he was about to turn away, she reached out. Not with words, not with anything dramatic, just her hand. She held it out gently, palm up, nothing forced. No need to explain it. He looked down at it, paused. Then, with the same quietness that had followed him all morning, he reached out and took it. His hand was worn, the skin soft with age. Her fingers curled around his, just for a moment. It wasn't a long handshake. It wasn't a grip. It was just a hand in a hand. Still, honest, steady. He gave a slight squeeze before letting go. There were no photos. No one around them seemed to notice. It wasn't the kind of moment that called attention to itself. It came and went like a breeze, soft, real, and gone before anyone could point to it. He picked up the chair with one hand, the cane in the other, and gave one last look toward the street. Then he turned and began to walk. She watched him go. He didn't walk fast, but his steps were sure. He didn't glance back. He didn't need to. She stood there for another minute, letting the sidewalk clear, letting the weight of the day settle in. Then she turned too, walked back into the crowd. They hadn't exchanged names. She didn't know where he lived, and he didn't ask who she was. But somehow, it didn't matter. Because in a moment that could have stayed silent, someone had reached out. And someone else had chosen to stay. He didn't talk about the parade when he got home. He placed the chair back in the hallway closet, leaned the cane carefully beside it, and hung his light jacket on the hook just inside the door. The house was quiet. It had been for years. No footsteps down the hall. No voice calling from the kitchen. No clatter of plates or hum of the TV in the background. Just stillness. He walked to the kitchen, made himself a cup of tea, and sat by the window. It overlooked the front yard, freshly mowed, small flag in the flower bed, a bird feeder swaying lightly in the breeze. He stirred the tea slowly, though he didn't need to. His thoughts were somewhere else. He thought about the parade, about how everything had looked the same. The floats, the music, the crowds. But this year, something small had been different. He thought about the young woman. He didn't know her name. He didn't know where she had come from, or if she had even planned on staying. But she had. She sat beside him without needing anything. She didn't ask questions he didn't want to answer. She didn't try to fill the space with noise. She just stayed. And when it was over, she reached for his hand. That was the part he kept thinking about. Not because it was grand, not because it changed everything, but because it was so simple. Someone had seen him, not as a man sitting alone, not as a reminder of something missing, just as a person worth noticing. And that was enough. He reached into the pocket of his shirt and pulled out the root beer candy she'd handed him earlier in the day. The wrapper was slightly wrinkled. He turned it over in his palm once, then set it on the table. He wouldn't eat it. Some things you keep, not because you need them, but because they remind you of something that mattered. He didn't expect to see her again. That's not what it was about. She didn't sit with him because she felt sorry for him. She didn't take his hand because she was trying to fix anything. She had simply noticed. And in a world that often moved too fast, where people rushed by without looking, where moments passed without pause, that mattered. The next year, when parade day came around again, he was there. Same chair, same spot, same careful way of settling in. And next to him, the space was still open. Not because it was empty, but because now it meant something else. It wasn't a symbol of loss anymore. It was a space held for kindness, a space left open in case someone needed a place to sit. He didn't know if anyone would stop. He didn't expect it. But if someone did, he would be ready, because one quiet moment had reminded him. Even the smallest gestures, given without expectation, have a way of staying with you. Sometimes, all it takes is a hand reaching out, and someone choosing to stay. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this, we'd love to have you as a subscriber.